lot of our thinking because it was just so terrible. But after being in the public school for 30 years and going through maybe lots of car accidents, 8 suicides, 2 murders, and watching that pattern of people coming to church, I have always been impressed that that I don't think, sometimes I wonder if we don't give people credit. Are there more people going to church than we would ever imagine? That has been my experience. And also too, is there something that if God is pursuing us constantly, you know, and a lot of those kids, most of them that are going to be buried this week are Catholic. That was the other thing I read in the New York Times today, versus they have them separated between 2 graveyards right now, St. Rose of Lima, and there's another graveyard. But Father was saying, and Father Kovics was saying in his presentation this morning, he was talking about, he talked to different priests about all the funerals they'll be doing this week, and they're just kind of talking to each other and saying, did we ever think that we would have, you know, be burying all these poor innocents, you know, and watching the Monsignor the other night on TV just break down in tears. I don't know if anybody's watched him on TV, but he addressed people, and then he just broke down in tears. He was the first person, because most of the children who were killed are Catholic, he was the first person to address the parents. And then he started to cry at the end. But in the end, part of the problem is that we don't have enough respect or insight or thoughtfulness to realize that everybody's God's journey is different. Maybe we have to take people where they're at, in spite of our perceptions of whether they're going to church or not, that God is still pursuing them.
God is always pursuing you. So it doesn't make any difference who you are. God is always pursuing you. The hound of heaven, you know, I don't know if you... God is always pursuing us. And then I mentioned that a couple of weeks ago, that within ourselves there's a dynamic tension between good and evil. God is in us, which means that there's the power of love. Okay, God is in us, so the power of love is there. And why and what causes it, we don't know. We created the myth of Adam and Eve to find out why there was something evil in us, but we really do not know. Okay, so we don't know what caused it. But we know that within us, there's that element of selfishness and self-centeredness and sinfulness in every one of us, every single human being. And at the same time, there's that element of love in every single one of us. So it's up to us to say, where do I want to steer my dynamic tension? Towards self or towards others? Now you have a dramatic moment like that, where there's a terrible tragedy. You have to be totally insensitive not to be touched by the dynamic force of love that's in you. How much love does it take to realize that you got 20 little kids and 6 adults who have given their lives to these little kids, that this is an extraordinary act of cruelty, and then at the same time there's an extraordinary act of love. So the element is so dramatic that you practically have to be an imbecile not to react. Even a person who's generally very insensitive would have to react to such a tragedy. And I'm sure even this morning as you were reading the names, I was crying and there was a number of people crying. It's how much love does it take?
I'm not sure how this is all going to turn out, but I've been doing a lot of thinking about this, staring at TV for an hour and a half the night that it happened, and then finally I just couldn't take it anymore. But, and you know, talk at our table about the next day about, you know, the evil is pervading us, and my reaction is much different. It's I see a whole lot of good happening, a tremendous amount of good happening. That church service was full. I saw it on TV. And I read a comment on the internet yesterday. It was from the Sojourners, the head of the Sojourners, his website. He was taking to task a certain very conservative cable news network who had a preacher slash politician on decrying that this is all the result of taking God out of the public eye and taking God. That's so insensitive, and that's so, and you know, this, I mean, it's so off the mark.
Yeah, can I add, someone said from my parish today, a holy card that went like this. I kept the top part and I threw the rest away. They said, why did this happen in our schools? Because God is not in our schools anymore and Jesus took them home. Well, if God wasn't in that school that day for all those teachers who gave up their lives, I don't care if they were Catholic, Muslim, or whatever, then to do that, if the Holy Spirit wasn't there, well then somebody really misunderstands what happens in those moments.
God is always there. I mean, so they didn't take, you may have, maybe God is not in your heart, but God is in the heart of hundreds and thousands of people. So it's up to each one to say, how much of God's presence is going to be in my life? God is love, okay? How much of God's presence in my life? How much do I allow God to be in my life? What percentage of my life is controlled in some way, or moved by Jesus or by God? How much of my life is moved by love? I trust it's a very large percentage, and the more our lives are moved by love, then the more our lives are controlled by God. Because God is love. So that tension is always going to be there. Now, two things, and two comments. Evil will always exist in the world, and we've seen horrible examples of it. God is not going to remove our freedom. So human beings will always remain free. Human beings will always remain free. So that if there's a stupid, someone who's, let's say, totally, let's say, devoid of intelligence, and yet has control over high-powered rifles, and he's going to try to kill people, God is not going to stop it. We are free human beings. God is not going to prevent evil. We have to prevent evil. God respects our freedom, allows us to do the most stupid thing.